Eros and creativity. That's the topic. And you were chewing on something about how the erotic meets large systems. Is that the thing you were chewing on?
Oh, yeah, that's one possibility. But now that we're suddenly live, I feel like that might be a big chunk to
Hmm.
start with.
Okay.
I actually have a question. I was curious about, you came up with the idea of over the edge
Hmm.
for the title, and I just wondered, like, what was your inspiration for that, or what does that mean
Well,
for you?
that to me is the nature of Eros, is that it's an energy that takes us to the edge of what we know and what we're comfortable with,
Hmm.
and then it pushes us over the edge, which is what generates all of that energy that we could say is interesting or exciting or
Hmm.
stimulating,
Hmm.
but it's also taboo because the structures of society and the social structures are about containment,
Hmm.
about keeping that back because a entirely erotic society has no boundaries. It's entirely creative, but it doesn't have structures that give it limitations. So
Right. Or it seems like it has structures, but those are erotically and creatively played with. Like it's funny, I actually think about bondage or something. Like
mhm.
containment can be extremely erotic, but it's being played with. It's not the only option.
Yeah, but the containment is actually the resistance to the erotic, right? So this is, I mean, if you want to use bondage as an example, so that is you're playing with it, but it's the play is actually a facsimile of actual damaging, destructive containment of the being. And so this was what creates the tension, and the tension then has the promise of release. And so the sexuality is this sort of tension, the buildup of tension, the pressure against the containment, and the release into the bigger space. So
So would you say all of that's erotic? I guess my point is I feel like Eros is the containment, the edge, and the over the edge, and the interplay of all of those. If it was just a boundless space with no containment, I don't know that there would be Eros because there would be nothing
no, but
to,
this is the
yeah.
resistance. So Eros as an energy doesn't have containment to it. It's we contain it out of our
Mm,
conditioning, out of our
mm,
resistance, because Eros, pure Eros, we could say, is a unitary energy. It
mhm.
doesn't have individuation in it. And we, as convinced as we are that we're individuals because of this whole buildup of psychology layered on top of biology, that we are separate, then we have this pushback to that energy.
Well, I feel like pushing back to what you're
Yeah,
saying. Just
pushing.
kidding. No, no, no. I actually just want to chew on this. I think this is interesting. I think whenever we get into like absolutely defining anything, there's paradoxes. So I don't think this has to be resolved.
Mhm.
But don't you think in the creativity of Eros, the quality that is containment is one of the energetic options?
What do you mean by that? By the quality of containment?
In other words, the felt experience of constriction or of not breathing or of being small and tight with something binding you
Mhm.
or being held back from something that you want. Don't you think all of that, just quality and like the endless panoply of options, is part of the creativity of Eros?
No, but Eros isn't creative. It's the resistance in relation to Eros that is the creativity.
Hmm.
So this is, if you, well, I mean, this is kind of like a thought experiment more than anything, but if you imagine no resistance, just the pure movement of energy, it doesn't have any kind of trace to it. It doesn't, there's nothing that quantifies it, nothing that gives it shape or form. It's just energy without time, without location. And you could even say it's energy. It's nothingness
Hmm.
and it's totality.
Right.
So that, and
You're
you,
calling that Eros.
yeah, well, you could call that Shakti. And there's lots of words for it, but it's an
Mm.
energy that's moving without time and space. And we, locating ourselves as we do, need time and space and location and meaning. And so
Okay.
we assert that
Yeah.
in relation to that movement. Now, what we're all moving from this structure of form to formlessness. We're looking for the ecstasy of the release from the structure. And then we say, oh, well, I'm going to go meditate in a cave, and then I'm going to like the Shakti is going to go, and I'm going to like the thousand petaled lotus. I'm going to like get enlightened. I'm going to free of form, or I meet this beautiful woman, and I go, oh, if I could just have her in my bed, and then we will, have the ecstasy of, or whatever the image is, and that's the resistance to the absence of me, actually. So this is the irony of the projection of the mind. It projects a facsimile of the energy, but not the energy itself. And that's
Hmm.
the resistance. And that's what's creative. And like we are amazingly creative in the forms that we come up with that suggest anything from like, I'm going to get a new car and that's going to make me ecstatic to I'm going to have you as my wife, but wait a second, I'm going to have that one as my girlfriend. The movement, the constant movement of the facsimile of that boundless energy is the creative. And it could be a great painting, it could be great music, it could be the way we form relationship.
So that's your postulation of how you define those words and how the universe
I
is
like to think of it
structured.
as absolute truth, but okay, my postulation can fine.
I mean, yeah, we could, stay at the level of kind of like hashing out the definitions or just, yeah, work with a particular postulation to then, build from there. It's not quite how I've tended to
Well,
think of it, but
we'll lay out how you would think of it because it may be
oh,
quite different.
um, I don't know that I can lay it out so clearly, but I'm noticing I'm curious. I think I've thought of Eros more as the thing that includes the totality and the separation.
Mhm.
So it's the like lava lamp that's created by the trying to like maximize pleasure, resist the
Mhm.
absolute flow as the absolute flow.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I think that's not a bad way to see it because there is a paradox about form, which is that while it appears to be reality, right? This is the way we see reality. Is like you look like you're a person sitting opposite me that I have a relationship to. Form is actually empty. And so it's an illusion. So what you're talking about is actually the penetration of that apparent reality by the energy itself and the apprehension that it's one and the same. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, as the
Right.
Zen people would say,
Right.
right?
And then I see
So
creativity as the joyful dance that happens when you're like, we form, like,
yeah,
what can we do? Or fuck, like
mhm,
the resistance, the joy,
yeah.
the projection, the fantasy, the resolution, like all of it.
Yeah, you're a
Yeah.
happier version of what I'm saying. I'm more like the deconstructionist, like it's not real. There's only energy, and anything that appears to be real is resistance to that energy. And you're more like the energy is producing all these really interesting forms. So let's enjoy them, appreciate them, and dance in them, right?
And let them go.
Yeah.
And that,
Well, the
yeah.
letting them go, that's the trick. So, yeah, if you can enjoy them and dance with them, and also at the same time have that deconstructionist view that they're not actual. And this is the
Yes.
trick because we get caught up.
Yeah.
And oh, like you're this beautiful woman and I'm just going to dance with you, but I'm free of like all attachment. But then I find myself attached, and then you go dancing off with someone else. And then I feel this ripping away of the attachment that I didn't even know I had. And
Hmm.
now I'm in this spiral of the grip of
Hmm.
the apparent reality, which somewhere I had forgotten
Hmm.
is inherently empty.
And I guess what has helped me stay with the unabated, continuous one thingness of the manifest into the non-manifest is at that exact juncture,
Hmm.
everything is um creatively aligned. Like, so in other words, the gut wrench of that moment when
Mhm.
the person that you thought was going to do the thing doesn't do the thing is also Eros.
Mhm.
And then every second becomes a saturated doorway, or the field isn't broken apart into good and not good.
Mhm.
It's like met in a tantric way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's if the deep deconstructionist understanding of the nature of reality is continuously in contact with the good and the bad, the thing I like, the thing that I don't like, then absolutely we travel through all forms and shapes, and it's an information flow that's constantly feeding back to us like the directionality of consciousness, and the pain, the pleasure are indicators of the directionality. But mostly what happens is I forget all that and I go, oh, I'm in pain. What is the way out? I've got to go after that shiny object, which I know is going to make me feel good. And then I don't see in the shiny object that the pain is in there. Like the chocolate cake is pleasurable, and I just eat it until I get the stomach ache. And when I can see the stomach ache in the chocolate cake as I'm enjoying it, this is the true tantra, right? So it's all of it in
Yeah.
one movement.
I love that. I love that. I think something we've noticed on our connection over time is like the via negativa, maybe
Mm,
versus the via positiva or something like that, or the deconstructionist versus you could say the creative.
mm,
But I love that you see the stomach ache in the cake.
mhm.
And I tend to see in the stomach ache the awesome thing.
Right,
You know what I
right,
mean?
right,
So it's more
right,
like
right.
all of it's yes.
Yeah,
I say yes to all of it,
yeah.
and you kind of see the no in all of it, which is fine. You know what I mean? I think
Well, I think generally the movement to pleasure takes care of itself. Like nobody
yeah.
has trouble moving towards pleasure, right?
Hmm. I think people do.
Oh, okay. So tell me more about that.
Um, yeah, I think different people are organized differently around those initial devastations
Hmm.
and personalities, which you could just say are patterned life force or patterned eros or
Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
take different shapes in order to try and solve the problem of that being dropped. And
Hmm.
one way to solve that problem is to not move towards pleasure. I mean, think of the archetype of sort of Nurse Ratched or something like that,
Hmm.
or, or someone who's just so tight
Hmm.
that they're perfect instead of lascivious
Hmm.
or,
Hmm.
so I get your point that, we tend to move towards pleasure, but I think a lot of people get trapped
Hmm. So
in pain.
this brings up a kind of a slightly adjunct topic, which is the topic of control, right? The idea that I'm going to alter the flow of life in some fashion. And then what you're talking about is I'm going to like tighten up and try to control that pleasure pain movement to presumably either control the level of pain that I have or to enhance the level of pleasure. So that notion of control is kind of sort of essentially tied into this sense of a doer, that I am
Mm-hmm.
doing something,
Mm-hmm.
and that doing something impacts the way life shows up to me.
Mm-hmm.
This is the result of a lot of bifurcation of reality that apparently which appears to be actual. Like it does look like if I want to move my hand, I move my hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then if you track that back to like what was the origin of that thought to move my hand, or even to talk about moving my hand, you start to go back in time into a point of origin in which you have nothing at all to do with it, right? Generationally or
Yeah.
racially or
Which for
so
some reason I find so gleeful and relaxing. And it's
yeah.
just like, wee.
Well, it is relaxing, but can we live really getting deeply the non-doership that the phenomenology that makes up my life is?
Gosh, yeah. It's funny. I think about like Newtonian physics versus what's the other one? Like
Quantum
quantum
physics.
physics.
Yeah.
Thank you. Um, and they both operate,
Mhm.
So on one level, like you drop a ball and gravity drops it, and like we operate in that reality. And it isn't the deepest one.
Right.
Like quantum physics is more fundamentally true, in
Right.
which case a whole different thing is going
Right.
on.
Right.
So that makes me think there's some just expanded capacity for intelligence, perhaps, where you do still operate on the level of a certain
Yeah. Well,
level of reality, but you also superimpose on that a completely different set of rules.
yeah. Well, this higher level of intelligence is not going to be in the limitation of my intellect
Right.
or my even my body system
Or
or
even
even
my
right. So this is
anything.
so this is so this
Yeah.
goes to this question of, is there a doer here? Well, there's a doer that's constructing, a life and an action and like all the ups and downs and things I want and don't want. That's going on, and this is where most of us spend most of our time thinking about how this doer is going to survive and how this doer is going to get pleasure or control, right? So this is where we're occupied. But meanwhile, there's everything else that's going on, right? So when we look to where could higher intelligence occur, we have to
Mm,
look outside of the structure of what we know.
mm,
And this is where it gets really tricky because to do that, we have to give up this notion of doing and we have to relax into this quality of being. And in
mhm.
being, we
Or
have,
even being done, or like
well,
action happens, but
mhm,
the onus is something more complex
yeah,
than our own sense of self.
yeah. So
Yeah.
this is, I think, what we are exploring, if we can use that word, or inquiring into, or wondering about, or curious about is what is it that is happening outside of that very limited structure of I know. Okay, so first we have to, it seems to me, understand that I know is limited. That's a lot of for I think for many of us, that's a lot of giving up
Mhm.
because I know is what's been just educated into me and rewarded into me. And for someone like myself or yourself that has a very strong intellect, I know is like a way of dominating, right? I mean, we rise to the top of our societies because I know is um, so strongly embedded in us. So to give that up is to give up our our position really. It gives it to give up our power in a way. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the price
Mm-hmm.
to explore what I don't know.
It's kind of exciting because I feel it might be a thin bridge, but I feel a bridge now to that blip at the very beginning of what we were going to maybe talk about, which is like impacting larger systems.
Mm,
So maybe I'll try to see if I can like tiptoe across
yeah.
this very thin bridge. It might not be quite
Mm-hmm.
sturdy enough from where we just were, but I'll try.
Well, if it breaks, I'll just like watch you go into the ravine.
Um, so I will tell a little story that perhaps I've told you. And this story is a little bit beyond my own understanding. So I can't even story it that well. So I'm just going to kind of throw words in a direction of something mysterious. So I used to be a part of this community that would do a particular practice called tea group, which has different forms, but Boulder Tea Group was like you'd put 6 or 7 people in a room together, leaderless, and follow particular rules for 45 minutes and just see what the resultant group would get up to. And a few of the rules were like always spoke in the present tense about what was happening in this moment. You know, maybe you could give a quick headline of context, but you always came back to like what was happening right now. So it ended up being quite relational because what was happening right now was like, I feel attracted to you, or I feel upset that you just said that, or I want to sit closer to you, or I want to get up the hell out of this room. Whatever, you know, just all kinds of burping ups of various impulses or feelings would be named. And there were other rules, but I don't want to go into that. What I want to go into is the practice was really about revealing the self, like being in touch with what was going on for you and naming it in the group. Um, However, I did this practice for so long and it was so kind of creative because it was leaderless and all kinds of interesting things would end up happening. Sometimes it would turn into a therapy group about one person, or sometimes the whole group would get up to like, I don't know, just anything. So I started becoming interested in what if in what if instead of identifying as myself, I identified as the group, but still did the practice.
Mhm.
And that's because I was hanging out with you a lot.
Mm,
And
dangerous.
and I think the crossover of my sort of the experiment with you and the experiment in this group kind of crossed over in this way where I didn't even tell anyone I was doing this, but it's like I was the group and then I would still just speak what I was
Mhm,
feeling.
mhm,
And it was really interesting. One result, which was surprising, is at least all the times I tried it, unequivocally, everyone in the group would fall in love with me. Was like really liked me,
mhm,
really felt close to me, but I was them,
mhm,
you know? So that was fascinating. And then it's almost like a dream now. Like I can only speak about it.
mhm,
I don't actually know what I was doing. Like I couldn't
mhm,
even, I don't even know that I could do it again because that was a moment in time. I'm not even sure what I mean when I say that anymore because it was an actual occurrence and now I'm
mhm,
just talking about it. However, it did open up a curiosity in me. It's like, could I do that? Could we do that? Like watching the debate tonight.
mhm,
Tonight, Kamala and Trump are going to debate for the first time if this is being watched in the future. Anyways, is there a way to plug into a larger collective field and do something similar, which maybe isn't a doing? I don't know. This gets into
mhm,
what we were just saying of like, where is onus and where is action? And is there a
mhm,
doer if you're with a part, if you're identifying as a larger system?
mhm,
It still feels like there might even be a way to like impact it.
mhm.
which still has a doer, but it's a much less direct impacting. Like in those T groups,
Mm.
I didn't have an intention of what I was going to do, but
Mhm.
just by changing my identity that I was coming from, I did individually impact the group. Okay. That was my, do
Mhm.
you have something to say about
Yeah,
it?
so first of all, you should probably hang out with me more so that you'll have more of that experience.
Mm,
Yeah. Uh, the thing that you're talking about is the experiment, is uh, not really being that concerned with what the personality is generating. I mean, it's there, it's doing that. I like it, I don't like it. But in the practice you're talking about, that practice was really a way of saying, okay, I'm going to like dissect the generation of self so thoroughly that I don't find it interesting anymore. And now I start to wander into this more diffuse space called the group. And then what is that like?
mhm,
And then your experience there is I begin to speak as the group, which is really an energetic space. It doesn't have so much distinct structure as the personality does because that space isn't conditioned in the same way that the personal is, right? The personal is my mother said this to me, my teacher said that to me, I read this book. That's all the personal being generated as reality. But around that is something else that's being conditioned also, by the way, but not by those same forces. And now I'm in that field and I notice that everybody is falling in love with me. Now, why is that? Because we identify that space of no self with romantic love. That's what
I
we,
mean, I don't know that it was a romantic falling in love
okay,
with
but
me, and I'm just using that words, but there was lots of
there's
rapport. I
yeah,
could
okay,
say
attraction,
rapport.
feeling connected.
Yeah, it wasn't
Okay.
like people were even sexually attracted to me. I'm not saying that. It's just, you're great.
Mm-hmm.
More
Right.
like that.
No,
Like,
but
yeah.
my point isn't so much the specifics of it, but rather that space where we feel connected to each other inherently, not without effort, without like a practice. We're just there in a space which is by its nature interconnected, is a space that has so much potential and is like not explored well because it gets caught up in I love you. I want to have sex with you. You are attracted to me, so I want your money. I want control over you. Start wearing white only and put my picture up on the wall and start to worship it because that's what is this field. Well, the field isn't any of that. The field can be any of that, but the field isn't that in specific. The field is an unexplored, unformed space out of which we are pushing away from that into individuality.
Mm-hmm.
So the individual can exist in that space, and obviously we are the conditioning of our persona is being changed by the loosening of the boundary with that space. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm becoming a different personality, and more that personality is integrated with that larger field. Well, that's the exploration we're delving into is like how does this person become transformed? How does our relationship become transformed? How does our group get transformed? How does society gets transformed? Not because we're trying to exert an ideology
Mm-hmm.
into it. Oh, we should all love each other. We should share. We should live in a commune. Rather, it's the inherent directionality of that large space extruding into us the form that we become. So it's a becoming,
Mm-hmm.
it's what's next.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look backwards. Like we look
Yeah,
backwards, but it looks doesn't even look forward. It just manifests.
right. Yeah, it's like what's next? And it seems to me to be so deeply integrative. Like if I were to do this process with, say, this larger field of people watching the debate, I have to be the people who want to have no gun restrictions, or I have to be the people that just feel disgust every time Kamala laughs. Like that's all part of the field. So if I were to do this practice of being the whole group,
Right.
that is all has to work itself out. Um, sorry, I was just looking at a Jorg. Bye, Jorg. Um, that has to that has to be one thing. All the parts have to,
Yeah, so you're going to feel resistance in the personality. You're going to feel resistance to whatever it is that you don't like.
Mhm.
Like this person hates gay people. This person loves gay people. My conditioning is I love gay people. I don't like this guy that doesn't like gay people, or vice versa. So
Mhm.
you're at that edge of your own resistance, but you don't really even know what that thing is you don't like because you're pushing it away.
Mhm.
So you're right. You have to deconstruct, if you will, or let go or relax into and merge with those qualities and see both their emptiness and the paradox of the opposites, because you're
Mhm.
creating the opposite.
Mhm.
You're creating this quality that's outside of yourself, that's personified by, well, Trump if you don't like Trump, or Harris if you don't like her. Like you're personifying the thing you don't like,
Mhm.
but you know what? You're that because you're creating the thing you don't like. So where is that? Can you contact that? Can you be in that? And
Yeah.
can you be it so thoroughly that you lose interest in it? Because the antidote to these
Hmm.
these contradictions is to lose interest in them.
I love that because it's almost like if I were to somehow be able to do this in my well, my own psyche,
Mhm,
let's just say,
mhm,
it's almost like there's one less, like, okay, I happen to identify more as like being disgusted by Trump.
mhm,
If I were to integrate something in a way where I'm not separate from Trump,
mhm,
I am the group,
mhm,
therefore Trump is me,
mhm.
then there's this blending and there's almost like one less Trump in the world. Like the force that is Trump, the archetype, just weakens actually because I'm not paying
You're not
my,
right. You're not pushing away that
yeah,
those qualities of opposition feed off of your pushing them away, your aversion,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so it's actually disinterest that depowers them.
yeah.
Like, I don't find that interesting. If you go into a restaurant, there's some drunk guy that's just like spouting his views on politics. It's just not interesting, right?
Right.
It's not.
And I think it's not interesting. And I think interest is another doorway. Like, wow, what the heck creates this phenomenon?
Mhm,
Or the heart quality of like what led to this form taking shape, which is me. What is reality?
mhm,
So I think
mhm,
true interest or disinterest perhaps are both
mhm, mhm.
doorways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that field orientation, it's pretty to me, it's pretty simple to see how that acts on the individual, on my individuality. It in the same way, like I lose interest in my drives, the things that like I think are so important. It's like, well, they're actually not. They're there, okay, great, but they're not really that interesting. What's interesting is this larger space because it is inherently unknown, and therefore there's much more curiosity
Hmm.
that's generated by something that you don't know than something that you've been doing over and over and over again your whole life. Like
Mhm.
my psychology has been with me my whole life, and it's well known to me. It's not that interesting. It's not interesting to you either or anybody else. Like nobody wants my psychology. So what is interesting? Well, the thing I don't know is interesting. So that's pretty easy to see how that
Mhm.
interacts with the person, the individual, if I can use that term,
Yeah.
the apparent individual. But now I
Yeah.
go into like a relationship to you,
Yeah.
right? Now it gets a little bit trickier because are you in that exploration with me? Are you not? If you're not, what is that? What's the implication of that? How do I communicate that? If you don't see that what I'm seeing, then what are you seeing? Right. So now I'm delving into a deeper level, if you will, of the construction, and then amplify that to a group or amplify that to an election, a society, or into the world. And you see how that becomes it's necessary that we explore this together. Like my capacity isn't there to explore the global psyche, but we might be able to, or we, a
Mm-hmm.
larger we,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is what to me is like the um, direction of consciousness is it is moving to explore and transform large systems, back to your original point.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, I don't know what that direction is. I only know that I don't know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm super curious about that
Yeah.
because I don't know.
Yeah.
And that curiosity leads me to give expression to it, to try to communicate that curiosity to you. And then you happen to be curious also. And now we are, in communication with each other around that curiosity. And now others come and everyone is exploring that. So this is
Yeah.
kind of what we find ourselves doing. And this is why there is no authority in that.
Mm-hmm.
This is really important.
Mm-hmm.
There may be people who can speak eloquently, but that's just like there's some people that can lift barbells that are heavy, some people that can organize, production and distribution, can build bridges. Great. That's all cool.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody has an angle on this thing
Mm-hmm.
because nobody can know what is unknown.
Yeah.
We know it by exploring it and its manifestation.
Yeah.
We're all in it together, co-equally, without hierarchy. And that's a major adjustment
Yeah.
to systems because we're used to the king. And even in democracy, we're used to like the majority has decided on this ruler, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
This senator, this president, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to defer to that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a different thing altogether.
Yeah, I was even just thinking about the structure of this podcast, video cast, whatever you call it. We're just two people talking. And so it's really not about us even having that interesting of things to say or being particularly special in perceiving something, because I do think if there is emotion in this direction, I think more and more the perception is shared
Mhm.
and different people are languaging it in different ways, and conversations and nonverbal conversations are engaging it
Right,
in all
right,
kinds of ways.
right.
So it's almost like I imagine we're just in a larger field even as we're speaking. It's
Mhm.
like a different context for what we're doing. I
Yeah.
can't even describe it
Well,
well,
this is
but
okay. So I
yeah.
think this goes to a very interesting point, which is as we apprehend this larger field and we begin to express from that as best we can see in the paradox of the individual, we're taking a risk. And we're taking a risk of creating something which is a repeat of the conditioning. Like we're speaking together, we're recording, broadcasting this, and now I have this slight feeling that I am special because I have a microphone and like people are listening and it's so important, right?
Yeah.
So then I fall into that pattern. Well, that's the risk that we take by creating anything.
Yeah.
We take the risk that we are going to feel, authoritative in it, powerful. And we also take the risk that even if we don't feel that, we're going to get uh, people that want to destroy that thing because they're projecting onto it their, power and all that, their father images, their mother images, whatever that psychology is. And so there's a risk in this. Like I have no real interest in being in this microphone in front of a camera at all.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. To me,
Mm-hmm.
this is
I
like
believe you. Yeah.
so I like, but the need to communicate this as best I can, taking the risk that everything I'm saying is complete foolishness
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have any real meaning. It's just my ideas. And that those who hear it or listen to it are just going to say, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. That's a risk that
Mm-hmm.
is taken because communication is really an important thing. It comes out of communing,
Yeah.
right? It comes out of the connection. It comes out of that feeling that you were talking about with this group that you're in, where you are touching into the group space and you want to give expression to it, and you do as best you can. It's incomplete, it's imperfect, but it's touching in some way. People are moved, I think, by the vulnerability, actually, of stepping into the common space, blind, deaf and dumb, especially, and making noise, blah, 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 blah,
Mm-hmm.
that might maybe resonate from heart to heart, yeah? And
Mm-hmm.
that those who hear it may be touched and they will give their creative expression, whatever that is, because we're all creating all the time.
Yeah. 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 I really see like, and even if people do project or hate or feel disinterest, like that's the perfection of the field that we're
Mm-hmm.
actually in right now. That
Yeah,
is also us. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know, my mind just goes
Well,
blank there, but
yeah, it's
yeah.
like a larger system feedback loop, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, if there's a reaction to it, to me, if there's a reaction to something that I say, I take that as I need to go deeper,
Mm-hmm.
not that person's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the person might be stupid also. I mean, I'm not discounting the possibility that a person is projecting their father, issues or whatever on me.
Yeah.
Cool. But the fact that I'm not deep enough in my apprehension of the field and aligned enough with that, that it's like an automatic transmission.
Right.
That's information for me to go deeper, to find a different way. I mean, the fact is, this platform that we're even working within, this Next Culture Network, this podcast, this is actually an experiment coming out of, my insistence on no technology, basically, for many years. It's like, you got to be in the room and we've
Mm-hmm.
got to, and maybe that
And
was,
I'm all about like real-time embodiment
yeah,
in the same
right,
room
exactly,
also.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
and I think that may have been, maybe that was even true at the time, like the space was so delicate and barely able to be touched into that it did require that. And even though I've always had an open door policy, very few people can walk through that door because it's not that interesting, right? Because all the things that we find stimulating that occur in this sort of the persona are not what we're exploring. We're exploring something else. So it requires a subtlety of interest even. And now I find this platform is developing. It's like a whole different challenge in a way.
Mm-hmm. Keeping an eye on the time. We're good.
Mm,
We have like 15 more minutes.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what you said. It is
Yeah,
interesting,
yeah,
right?
but the
Yeah.
platform itself, this platform, because it doesn't have the immediacy of eye-to-eye contact, body-to-body contact, the space itself
Yeah.
is actually quite expanded,
Yeah.
right? So it's very much, at least from my perspective, very unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And whether the form, the electronic form, the pixelated reality, the internet space, all being intruded upon by AI and data collection and all this stuff being regurgitated back and our brains being changed, whether this is in any way an intelligent approach, I have no idea, and this is we may be like feeding the monster here by just creating more stuff that
Yeah.
Google can digest and sell ads around. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but this is the experiment right now.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to do the experiment because it's growing up amongst all the people that are generating this platform, this Next Culture Network platform, which has been gestating for some 20 years, really. It's been in discussion of how do you
Mm-hmm.
create a community in which people have mutual respect for each other, have deep listening, are inquiring on all the kinds of levels and attributes of society? How do you do that in the milieu that we have where, the internet is full of just the worst of humankind, you know? I mean, it's really an interesting question.
Right. Or maybe just that burping up of the things to be integrated, which have always,
Yeah,
been there,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
just loud.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I'm reading this book right now, The Righteous Mind by
Mm,
Jonathan Haidt, I think you say his name. Anyways, I just was reading a section on how humans, like bees. I think bees, beetles, ants, there's only a few other species that have done this really interesting jump to organizing collectively in order to survive, as opposed to looking out for themselves.
mm,
And like chimps can do all these things that humans can do, but they don't do anything cooperatively. They
mm,
are 100% out for themselves. They don't, one doesn't like shake the tree so the other one can get
mhm,
the nut. They
mhm,
haven't made that jump.
mhm, mhm,
And
mm.
humans were the ones who made that jump. And then we
Right,
took off in success
right.
because we were willing to bypass our own individual need
Mm,
to identify as something larger
mm,
enough to actually risk our own safety for a greater mutual
mm,
safety
mhm,
and capacity.
mhm,
And that's really interesting.
mhm,
And so I wonder about that process continuing, like
mhm,
as if, you go from the dot to the line, you go from the line to the square, you go
mm.
from the square to the cube, and then where the heck does the cube go? We don't
The
quite have
10,
that,
10-dimensional reality. Right, right.
but you go from the self to the collective,
Mhm,
but then what's the direction even more complex
mhm.
where you can identify as something large enough and really, 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 really rock it
Yeah.
as far as like success biologically, but also expansion in
Mhm, mhm.
consciousness.
Yeah. No, I think that's really an interesting question. We do have this tremendous capacity for cooperation and care for each other, and you see the evidence of that in so many ways. And we also have this other capacity, which is the disconnection,
Mm.
the greed, the self-interest, the violence,
Hmm.
right? So this is kind of the dialogue we're having. And it's kind of, as a society, as human beings. So we have the chimpanzee in us and we have the ants, we have all those attributes
Hmm.
going on. And I think the dialogue and the integration, and it really ties into what we're talking about, is how do you go into all those attributes and integrate them as a field, as humanity,
Yes.
right? And it
Okay.
does require us to go out of this, three-dimensional way of thinking.
I just thought of something.
Yes.
This book came out a while ago, so there might be people listening to this that are like, yeah, yeah, this is old news, but it's new to me.
Mm,
Another thing that I just read that I was just like, is it was this movement towards instead of identifying as an individual and identifying as a tribe that has actually created all of these qualities of generosity and sharing. So it's actually tribalism, which leads to so many wars, which leads to this, horrible fight we're going to see on the TV tonight.
mm,
That is the evolutionary process that led to things like one shakes the tree and the other gets the thing. It was trying to make a stronger group to fight the other group. So it's actually still resistance, still still separateness, definitely not like one coherent love field,
mhm,
you know. Um, but it was like willing to subvert the individual to fight them
mhm.
more successfully. So I guess I just wonder, does that just continue where the groups get larger? Even if we were to come together as an Earth, well, then we're against the Martians or whatever.
Mhm,
And how sameness makes us feel safe,
mhm.
like deeply biologically, someone who looks like us. I know there's something heartening about studying this sort of biologically, sociologically, archaeologically, whatever, you just realize, oh, that desire to just like people that are like you and be afraid of people that aren't like you is so deeply ingrained in what makes humans not chimps and in
Yeah.
part of our sort of evolutionary awesomeness.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know. Do we ever get to, I think what Pierre Desjardins, I don't actually know how to say his name, called the omega point, like the thing where it complexifies so much that it just becomes the one thing. There seems to be, I don't know, that idea excites me. But that, without having an other that you're resisting,
Yeah.
that you're protecting yourself from, even if the other is another large collection of others, or humans versus AI, or whatever.
Versus AI.
Yeah, I know.
That's not going to be a
That's
pretty
not.
sight.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if it should even go
Yeah.
like that.
Well, to me, that the structures that we have, those divided structures of the cooperative and the violent, the communal and the individual, those structures, because they live in opposition to each other, I don't think that they can be reformed. So I think this is where I think we create something of a different dimension. And because we don't know about it, it's something that we don't know how to do yet. And I feel like the manifesting of that from this field will look very different than what we can imagine from within the structure.
Yes.
And so this is why reforming, like I'm going to reform, our violent society. I don't think that that is the way to go. It's more like, let's create something from these additional dimensions that we can hardly even touch into.
Yeah.
So this is where for me, like right now, the language is negative. It's the not this, not that, because we don't have the language for what it is.
Right. But the language, it's so funny. I'm still having up these positive. What I'm noticing as we're sensing into all this, whoops, is like every stage of consciousness that perhaps you could say is more simple or more divided or is all included in the larger consciousness, and I don't think should be baby with the bathwatered. Like, for example, that you were mentioning the part that's like, ooh, we are doing a podcast, and so we're special, you know? That is actually just like a little part that's like, oh, the teacher saw me or whatever. Like, mom gave me a star on the calendar today. I think that's something not to get rid of, but include in sort of a like a larger quality that's like loving towards it. Like, oh, yeah, you're like kind of proud of yourself, Um, and I was gonna go somewhere with it, but I feel this quality of yes and sort of acceptance. And I think all everything is included and not discarded as a part of this process,
Yeah,
even as we step into the not knowing how it all fits
no,
together.
everything is certainly included, but much of what is included does not attract the level of energy, curiosity, or interest. So that is where the energy of life begins to give direction to the resistance, the form that's pushing back against it, right? And so for me right now, the curiosity is about this space that I don't know. And the space that I know, like, oh, I'm proud to be like a speaker, something like that, or maybe you'll like love me more. That whole thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, but I remember the chocolate cake. Well, you're the stomach ache. So just to keep that. Okay. So that isn't that interesting to me, actually. So it
Mm.
doesn't draw energy. So yes, it's there.
Right.
It's
And
all
should it
there.
like arise for a moment, it just goes back down,
Yeah, yeah. If it arises with strong attachment, then it's like, oh, that's really curious,
Mhm.
you know. And then there's interest in that, and it's like a reintegration of something. So
Mhm.
yes, it's all there.
Yeah.
Nothing goes away.
Yeah.
But I will say in sort of closing that it's all there, but it's all empty.
Yeah.
And that attention to the emptiness is the connection to the unknown.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I don't know if
Um,
there's, I think we can call that a wrap. I don't know if anybody wants to comment for a few minutes here or, okay, anybody want to say anything that's been listening, including production comments? Like we're interested in refining how things look, sound. So if you can comment on the most mundane things if you wish. Um, or you can comment on the content, or
or
you
you
can
could do a little dance.
do nothing at all.
Yeah, I think the production's come a long way in the last three events.
Thank
So,
you.
I almost did a dance, but I decided not to. um, yeah, I, I'm sort of hanging on by my fingernails here, trying to follow you guys. But I just had a sense of this whole, when when the sort of Newtonian mechanical universe was being described and discovered, it had always been there. And when that was the known, then the quantum reality or the quantum nature of things was already there, operating.
Mhm.
So if I'm understanding correctly, this is an exploration into, well, what is it that's actually operating there already? I mean, it's not trying to create something new.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Yep.
Yeah.
like,
So what is it? And to put that into language that it can be spoken about.
Yeah. And following language is culture, right? So then we begin to embody that thing which has always been there. And all of us begin to explore that, express it, embody it in the forms and shapes of our different societal, our businesses, our relationships, our schools. And then, and like what you're saying, I mean, using the Newtonian reality as an example, before that, there was just sort of the Catholic Church, right? Just saying God says, and the Pope says, and the priest says, right? So this is like there was nothing but God.
and even that is an extremely just Western mind view. There's all
Yeah.
other kinds of like
Okay.
commingling self-concepts and community
Yeah.
concepts that have, burgeoned forth from the human mind since the beginning.
And
But
that's sort of
yeah, one Western.
almost mythology out of nature, before that, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, because this could just keep going on and on as well. I mean, you could discover the language, and then out of that, the next language would come. You just don't know how deep things run.
Yeah.
Um, okay.
Yeah. And we don't know even if technology has a part in this, like we start to, when we're talking about other dimensions, we may not have the capacity in our brain cells to ideate other dimensions, but the extension of our brain, which is technology, may. So we don't even know. This is why I'm saying it's very hard to even imagine from where we are trained what
Mm.
it is we're exploring. And so this is why it can look kind of like a fool's errand. Um, and even collect. This is why maybe in a way dialogue is so important because it's a check on insanity, really. Like your comment, your clarity allows me to understand whether I'm gone off the deep end or not, right?
Sure,
And
sure,
vice
sure,
versa.
sure. So we could potentially all go insane together. That's the risk as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think that the technology piece for me, I mean, if it is a quantum reality, then I'm right there in the room with you.
Mhm.
In a mechanical universe, I'm on the other side of the Atlantic, and but I mean, potentially, there is a room that is not necessarily in that we're in, but I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's not a room. It's
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's an
yeah,
occurrence
Right.
in the
not a
occurrence.
room. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great example of something beyond, let's say, three dimensions, right? Because we're in something that's not a room that we probably, 50 years ago couldn't have even imagined. And here we are, and it's just like normal now. And we're functioning, we're communicating, we're exploring together in something which is not located actually in any real way that I can see. So
Sure. No, but thanks very much for this. It's great.
yeah,
Appreciate it.
thanks for participating. I think that having some live people engaged actually gives it some energy.
And totally the perception of just all of you listening live is the engagement.
Mhm.
Like there's a shared field just by our voices being heard. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're gonna sign off. All right. Bye-bye.